Welcome to the fourth and final level of color mixing. You will need your sketchbook, something to write with, a ruler, a cup of water, please filled only halfway, you do not need to fill it very high, a watercolor palette. Some of them look like this, some of them look better than this. Some of them are pieces of cardboard with watercolor glued to them. They all work exactly the same. Please don't fight over them. And lastly, a watercolor brush. If your brush does not have a green handle, it is not a watercolor brush. Please use the correct brush. Before we can get started, we do need to set up our paper. It's going to be very similar to the previous levels, but slightly different, so make sure you're not just setting it up the same way. So we're going to start at the top again by tracing our ruler. And we're going to do that 3 times. So we've got one section here. Going to go below that. Have a second section here. And below that, this is what is slightly different. You're not going to split it into 2 different categories, 2 different sections. You're just going to do one nice long one again. Come back up to the top one and go ahead and split that, like our value scales, into sections. So every inch I'm going to draw a tick mark. And then I'm going to draw a line straight up. Please label each one of these sections. Your top label is value. Middle label is smooth value. And bottom one is blending. We'll just say blended. If you need to, please take a moment, pause the screen, and make sure your paper looks like mine. Below your 3 scales here, we are going to do our color wheel once again. So I'm going to add a circle. 3 circles, one for each of my primary colors. Next to those primary colors, I'm going to add my circles for my secondary colors. And connect those to their primaries. Please take a second if you need to, pause the video and make sure your paper looks like this. We are going to begin up here at the top. You're going to need your water, your paintbrush, and you are going to choose one color. So some of these, like my orange one here, you can see that there's not a lot of paint in the center of it, but there is still paint along the side. So please make sure we're using every little bit of paint. I'm actually going to use my orange color here to show you that you can. Our value scale with watercolor is going to be slightly different than our value scales that we did last unit. We are going to start, our last block will be the color of the paper. Our first block will be our darkest, just like our last unit. But we are going to start at the light end because watercolor is best used if you build it up. So what I'm going to do to create light color is add a lot of water to my orange. The more water that you add, the lighter your watercolor will be. So I dipped it in, dripped it off, and I'm adding it to that well. And I'm going to repeat that a few times until I've got a good amount of water kind of sitting in that bottom there, so that I know that I'm getting this nice, I'm going to get a nice light orange color. Now, I've got a good amount of water in there. Now, I'm not just going to dip in here and go straight to here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to dip into the center here. I'm going to wipe off, and then I'm going to get a little bit of water on my brush. And I'm going to fill from this square all the way down with this very, very light orange. I'm not even sure if you can see how light that is on the screen. You kind of can. And I'm going to repeat that until my entire square or my entire rectangle is filled with that very light orange. So I'm going to the orange, and then I'm getting a little extra water before I put it to the paper. Hope you can see it that time. And I'm repeating. So getting some orange, dripping it in the water first before I'm laying it down to get that light orange. And I'm doing this all the way across. Okay. So all of these should be relatively the same value. Now, we're going to repeat that same process. We have water in here, and we're going to slowly build up the color into each one of these squares. So this square we're no longer going to touch. We're going to start here and repeat that same process to build up that orange color. So I'm dipping in the orange, in the water, in the orange. Need a little more color than that. There we go. And I'm going to fill all the squares all the way down to that last square. This is going to take practice. You might not get it on your first try, and that's totally okay. Alright, so now I've got 5 squares that are the same and 1 that is much lighter. So now I'm going to go from this square down. These 2 squares are, well, I should say these 3 squares are finished, but these 2 squares are not going to get any more paint. So I'm going to clean my brush off, add a little bit of water to my well, make sure I'm wiping my brush in between, and I'm starting with this guy. I'm going to repeat that same process. I'm going to take that all the way to my last square. Notice how I'm using less water now. I'm not going back to my water cup as often. My pigment is getting darker. Alright. Now these 3 squares are finished and will not get any more paint. We're going to go to this square and work our way down. I'm really wiping that brush. I'm hardly adding any more water now. Just at that one. Yep, so I'm going here down. Good. So now these 4 here do not get any more paint. I'm only going to be adding paint to these last 2 now. From this point, I'm not adding any more water to my well. I'm going to use what's already in there. I'm going to show you a trick now. So I've got a big puddle of orange here. What I'm going to do is I dipped my brush in my water and then I squeezed it out so that it can kind of suck suck that water up instead of applying it. It went a little bit too far. Alright, so now this one is finished, and the only square we'll apply color to is this last one. You want as little water as possible. You want lots of pigment on your brush. You can see my brush is kind of orange. And you're going to add that into your last square until it is as dark as you can make it. And there you have a value scale using watercolor. Still using one color, and I would suggest using the same color you just used, so I'm going to do orange again. We're going to do the same thing, but this time I want you to attempt a smooth value change. So I want to see the same type of value change, but these lines have been eliminated. So it's going to, like an ombre, go from dark to light and transition smooth. So I'm going to start the same exact way. I'm going to put a ton of water in my orange. I'm going to load my brush up, then I'm going to get a little bit of extra water, and I'm going to start to paint that in. Across my square. Now I'm going to leave up here alone, and I'm going to do that same thing, but I'm just going to blend it down this way. So it's going to start to get a little bit darker down this end. Okay. Leave this area alone. I'm gonna kind of keep moving my way down, getting that nice subtle transition. And you can use your value scale as a guide, right? When it should kind of be transitioning. Blend it all together. I'm getting to the point where I'm getting a little darker down my one end. So I'm really getting the paint in the corners of the palette. There you go. So it should look very similar to the top, except there is no set transitions. It's a smooth transition from dark to light. At this point, you can choose a second color. I suggest doing 2 primary colors, but you can do any 2 colors that you want. So I am going to do 2 primary colors. I'm going to do my yellow and my red. For blending 2 colors together, I want to teach you a trick that is called wet on wet. that is when, before you add any paint to the paper, you wet it first. So I just have water on my brush, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to fill my entire square with just water. Okay. Then I'm going to start building up my 2 color values, nice and slow. I'm going to start with my yellow. Lots of water. And then I'm going to take that yellow and start adding it right onto the area where I had already put water. What you'll notice is when you do wet on wet, the paint stays a little bit more consistent, like you're a little bit more in control. Now I'm going to leave the center portion light, but I'm going to darken the ends a little bit. So I get nice vibrant yellow and it blends to a lighter yellow. Blend that out a little bit further. Okay. From the other end, I'm going to bring in my reds. I'm going to clean my brush off really, really well, wipe it, start adding some water into my red. Good. And again, right on that area where I had already put some water, I'm going to start to build that red in. I'm going to bring it right across that yellow paint. And then the same thing, start to build up my red color from the sides, so my sides are a little bit darker. So then you have a blended color. Down here at the bottom, it's going to be very, very similar. We are going to do our primary colors. So I'm going to start with my red. Wash off my brush. Add my yellow. Nice rich yellow. And my blue, I had to go grab another palette for my blue. So you can see here what the cardboard palettes look like. My blue. Now, when you go to do your secondary colors, I do not want you using the existing secondary colors on the palette. This green is a very different green than what secondary green actually is, so I want you mixing the 2 colors together. So what you should do when you go to do your secondary colors is do some wet on wet. Right, so I wet my paper with just water. Then I'm getting my red. I'm going to fill that circle with my red. You kind of see how that moves. Soak some of that up. If you don't want it puddling, you can soak it up with your brush. And then I want you using the primary blue over top to work to create your purple, instead of using the purple that's already existing. So that's too much blue. I'm going to need to add a little bit more red back into that. There we go. To make our secondary purple, which is going to be very different looking than the existing purple on the palette. I will be able to tell. And repeat that process for your other two secondary colors. So I'm going to do my red. Rinse my brush. And add my yellow over top to create my orange. Got too much yellow, so I'll soak some of it up. There we go. Again, that orange is very different than the orange that is in your palette. As you can see, that's the orange on the palette, that's the orange that mixing two secondary colors creates, so please make sure you are doing it correctly. Adding my blue. And repeating with my yellow to make my new green. Congratulations, you have finished level 4 of color mixing.